2026 is apparently going to be the year of me testing how consistent I can be with my reading journal because, as you all saw in my reading journal setup a couple weeks ago, which you guys seem to love, by the way, I have never actually had a reading journal for myself. I've made plenty of videos in the past before, but I've never actually kept up with one long term, and I've set a little bit of a goal for myself that I'm nervous to mention on here just in case I don't actually achieve it, but I want to keep up with monthly reading journal setups, or at least close to that throughout the year, and we will see what my thoughts are at the end of December after doing that for 12 months. So with that being said, I bring you guys my April 2026 reading wrap up today. I did the first 3 months in my first setup a couple of weeks ago, so that video will be linked down below in case you're curious, but today we are only talking about April. And what's great is I actually read the most in April than any other month this year so far. I read 8 books, but that also means that you will get to hear a little bit of my thoughts on all of these books potentially before my reading channel does, ironically, because I do reading wrap-ups on my other channel, Sophie Joe, every 3 months, but I do want to talk briefly about each book that I'm journaling about today, and also the other things that we will get to towards the end of this setup. So yeah, with that being said, I suppose I shouldn't ramble on too long. You guys are seeing me right now make my stats page and reading wrap-up page for the month. So on the left, I have a couple of pie graphs and bar charts. These are all taken directly from Storygraph, which is one of the apps that I use to track my reading. Both my Storygraph and Goodreads are linked down below, by the way. And you'll see from the ratings on the bar graph that I actually had 3 5 stars this month, which was absolutely insane. I wouldn't say I'm a super harsh grader, but I do not give 5 stars like candy. And the only reason that we had so many this month was because I read a highly anticipated sequel, and then I reread 2 books that I'd already gave 5 stars in the past. So overall, I'd say April was a really good reading month, ratings wise and also numbers wise, because I did read, again, the most amount of books and pages than I have all year so far. So I suppose I shouldn't dawdle any longer. Let's get into a quick recap of every book that I read, what I rated it, and what my thoughts are, aka if I recommend them or not. So the first book that I read in April was Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane. This is a very short book that tells the story of 4 different slaves escaping slavery in America. And it was a very brutal book, very gory, very detailed, and definitely a harsh read, but I got this book from Aardvark and I was very intrigued because it's definitely out of my comfort zone, but I feel like it's a kind of story that needs to be told and needs to be read. So it was definitely a challenge for me to pick this one up and finish it, but I did it in bite-sized chunks because the subject matter was so gruesome, and overall I gave it 3.5 stars. I was really proud, or at least inspired by Clay Kane, because he said in his introduction how determined he is to tell the real history, even if it isn't very palatable, because these stories deserve to be told and told honestly so that history doesn't repeat itself, especially in a time where history is being rewritten in schools and things like that, which is absolutely horrendous. So I definitely appreciate his take. My only setback with this book was that I didn't really feel super connected to the characters. They felt like caricatures to me, and it could get a little repetitive through each story. So I don't know, it was a bit of a mixed bag with this one, but I gave it 3.5 stars, and I still thought it was a very important book and would recommend it if you're interested in learning more about American slavery and the history of that. Next, I picked up Rewind It Back by Liz Tom 40. This is the last book in the Windy City series, and it came out like a year ago, so I finally picked it up. I was putting it off for so long, partly because I was nervous to finish the series, and I also just procrastinate doing that all the time with all different types of books, but also because I didn't want to pick up Rio's book. For some reason I was like, I don't know if this is gonna hit, and trust me when I tell you, this hit. I don't know what I was on when I put this off for literally like 11 months, but I finally picked up the audiobook when I was on a road trip last month, and I inhaled it in literally 2 days, and it was 4.5 stars. It was so good. So this follows our boy Rio, who is one of the main characters in the Windy City series, and this series follows a bunch of different athletes and their individual romances and friendships and found family in the city of Chicago. And Rio is like the golden retriever, constant third wheel, and he finally gets a romance in the final book of the series where he falls in love with his childhood best friend Hallie, and this is just as precious as I wanted it to be. I mean, maybe precious is the wrong word because it is definitely like a fun and spicy time, but Rio is is funny, he is so heartwarming, he is so attentive to Hallie, and I loved Hallie as well and how determined she was to make a living because she is struggling with a lot of debt for reasons that you find out in the book. And overall, this was just a perfect end. Like, the very last chapter of the book was like a sitcom ending where all the characters got together for like a bonfire, and it was the cutest thing ever. And I just love Liz Tomforty's writing. She's truly one of my favorite contemporary romance authors out there, and it was so satisfying to finish this series on such a high note. The next book I read was The Night We Met by Abby Jimenez. This is her newest release that came out about a week or two before I picked it up. And I was nervous going into this because last year her release was Say You'll Remember Me, and that one was a little bit of a disappointment for me. Now, I give that book 3.5 stars, which is genuinely a good rating from me. But in comparison to her previous books, like Yours Truly or Part of Your World, which I gave like 4.5 stars, and Inhaled, Say You'll Remember Me was not my favorite, and it fell flat. And so going into this one, I had pretty low expectations. And once I knew the plot, I was also kind of skeptical because this story follows our main character, Larissa, who is dating this guy named Mike, but the actual romance is with his best friend, Chris. And it was one of those, like, where is the line drawn here? Are we gonna be like emotionally cheating? Like, what is the deal here? How is Abby gonna write a wholesome, beautiful romance amidst this like insane drama? But I think honestly she tackled it really well. I won't lie, this is not the first of this type of book that I've read before, like, you know, messy, potential emotional cheating kind of thing. Like, I love a book with drama, even if it's a little toxic, and I don't necessarily mind it being a little bit unhealthy. That sounds crazy, but I think it's a different approach going into a book expecting messy drama and unlikable characters versus going into a book written by Abby Jimenez where you expect a wholesome romance and characters you root for. So I was a little nervous, but suffice it to say, I listened to this audiobook on the way back from my road trip and literally listened to the entire thing in one singular day. I got back, started unpacking, was doing computer work, and I couldn't take my headphones out of my ears. I was just completely enraptured. And I'm not going to spoil anything about the book, obviously, but all I'm going to say is I am ready, prepped and ready for Mike's redemption arc, which is going to be the next book. So all in all, I gave this book 4 stars. Really, really loved it. Thought it was super good. And I was surprised, pleasantly surprised by Abby Jimenez with this one. And I cannot wait to read more by her. Now, the next book that I read was my absolute favorite book of the entire month. I have a hard time talking about this book and this series because it truly has impacted me so much this year. And that book is Empire of the Damned by Jay Kristoff, which is the second book in the Empire of the Vampire series. Now, if you know me, if you've seen my previous reading journal video, or if you've watched my reading channel, you know that Empire of the Vampire I read in January, picked it up randomly from the bookstore, and it not only became an immediate 6-star read, it is literally in the running for my favorite book of all time ever. Like, this series, Alchemized and Throne of Glass, are my 3, like, 10 out of 5 stars, most incredible books I've ever read in my entire life, and I don't say that lightly because I've read Alchemized 2 times if you count Manacled, and I've read Throne of Glass infinite amount of times. So the fact that literally in a couple of weeks or months this series has already made it to that top tier list just tells you everything that you need to know. This second book was just as good as the first one, if not a little bit better. I have a hard time comparing them because the stories are just so different, but the 2 main characters in this book, Gabriel and the child, I won't say any specifics because that would be a spoiler, but them 2 have my entire soul. I love them and their flaws so deeply. This book is both hilarious as well as so smartly written. The world building, the characters, the relationships, the plot. The villains are so like evil, like make me want to vomit evil. The main characters have their issues, but I literally want them all to succeed so much. And there is so much palpable love in this book, not necessarily romantic, but just like platonic and familial love. And it is literally life-changing, heartbreaking. I cried during this book. Like, it is incredible. So enough about that. But suffice it to say, it was a 5-star. Now, I did read 4 more books in the month that I am going to talk about, but just so you know, we're moving on to the next spread in this video, which is going to be my collage spread. So if you guys watched my previous video, which I keep mentioning and I will not mention anymore because I know it gets annoying, but I'm doing collages for my 5-star reads or for big things that happened in my reading month. So of course, I had 3 5 stars this month, one of them being Empire of the Damned. However, I did do an Empire of the Vampire collage in my previous video, so I didn't want to do the same thing basically twice because it would look very, very similar. So instead I'm doing a collage for my other 5 stars that I got this month, and then we will also do a spread on the right for something very, very special. But in the meantime, the next book that I read in the month of April was Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Mass. I was terrified to go into this book because I know how controversial it is, and personally, I didn't think that it would be one to mesh with me. However, my friend Sassy picked this for me to read, and I picked a book for her to read. We did vlog it, and that video will be coming out eventually on my other channel. But I gave this book 1 star. I'd give it 0 stars if I could. This book was awful. I literally hate read it from like chapter 3 onward, and I'm gonna read you my review because truly I don't think I could summarize it any better, what my feelings are. So I said, a practically pubescent girl with the most eye-twitching DM levels of irritating personality and a pet snake to teach her how sex works somehow gets 4 immortal beings who haven't felt the touch of a woman in about 4 centuries to fall in love with her. Right. Madeline Miller is rolling in her proverbial grave. And I stand by that. The main character was so annoying. She was not at all funny. Like, she was just so cringe. All the main characters were absolute terrible representations of the mythical characters that they were supposed to be portraying. And when I tell you that Madeline Miller is dead at this book, I mean because Song of Achilles is the most beautiful book of all time. Well, not really, but it's gorgeous and perfect and amazing, and seeing Achilles and Patroclus portrayed in the way that they were in this book made me want to jump off a bridge. So moving on, the next 3 books that I read this month were the first 3 books in the Binding 13 series, and that is why I'm making a collage for them on this spread here. So I am vlogging this entire process, but I am doing a reread of the entire Binding 13 Boys of Tommen series, and I read the first 3 during the month of April. So the first book I gave 4.5 stars, and then the second and third book each I gave 5 stars. However, if you know anything about Boys of Tommen, you know that it kind of goes in duologies. So the first 2 books are Johnny and Shannon's story, and then the next 2 books are Joey and Aoife's story, then we get Gibbs's book, and etc, etc, etc. So even though Binding 13 isn't a 5-star, I thought it would be better to make a collage for Johnny and Shannon on the left here, because truly in my heart they are still just a beautiful, wonderful couple that I love so dearly. And then next month I will talk about Saving 6 and Redeeming 6 together in that collage. Now, speaking of collages, on the right here, instead of doing another book collage, because again I didn't have another book to write about that wouldn't just be repetitive, I decided to make a collage for Arirang, which is BTS's new album. If you know me at all, you know how much I adore BTS. They're literally my favorite musical artist of all time ever, and when their album came out I absolutely obsessed, and I'm still obsessing over it, and I felt like they deserved a little bit of a shout out in this journal. So it's not reading related, but it is hobbies and interest related, and trust me, I would journal about them every day if I could. I love them so dearly, and I did manage to snag tickets to their show, and I am unwell and over the moon about it, okay? So I'm going to journal about that as I finish talking about these books. Now, Binding 13. Back to that, right? In this book, we follow Johnny and Shannon. Shannon is in a family of 5 siblings, and they live in the Lynch household, and their father is domestically abusive and very violent to all of them, including their mother. So the story is, on the surface, a romance between Shannon and this boy named Johnny, who is a rugby star at Tommen College, which is the private school that she gets to go to. However, beneath the surface, we see just a heartbreaking story of these characters, these children basically trying to survive their abusive father and get out of such a terrible, terrible situation. And then the rest of the book follows other characters as they also go through their individual terrible situations. Like Saving 6, which is the second book that I gave 5 stars this month, is a story about Joey, who is Shannon's older brother. And Joey has a romance with this girl named Aoife, and his main struggle, besides the fact that his, again, father is abusive, is that he also is addicted to drugs. And so that is a whole other character and story arc in those books as well. But overall, these books are so emotional. They are so impactful because you just fall deeply in love with every single character and they just mean so much to you. And going on this reread journey has been emotional, to say the least, but it has also been so rewarding because I have loved being with my Boys of Tommen characters yet again. Alright, with that being said, that is basically a wrap up of every book that I read in April, so you guys get a little bit of a sneak peek ahead of what the reading channel gets, although a lot of the books that I read this month have been vlogged, so if you want to see vlogs for them, go check out that channel, it'll be linked down below. Finishing out my arirang spread, I decided to actually try and write some Korean. Now, I am determined I want to learn Korean. I'm currently in the middle of learning French. One day I want to actually learn Korean because I think the language is just so amazing. But I tried to copy the verses of the song arirang that are in their song Body to Body here on the paper, and it is definitely not perfect. I probably butchered a lot of the characters, but I was trying my best, okay? And I think that it's a perfect representation of what this album and just this band means to me. Anyway, with that being said, I unfortunately forgot to film an outro, so we're going to use some still clips to end this video, but thank you so much for watching. I love you so much. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you soon for a new bullet journaling video.